Friends, we are so thankful for this opportunity to be back together this afternoon. So appreciative of all of you who are here with us for today's training. We want to hop back in and continue our training this afternoon, and I am happy to introduce Dr. Ben Conner. Dr. Conner is the professor of practical theology and directs the Center for Disability and Ministry at Western Theological Seminary in Holland. The center exists to support ministry leaders of all abilities in nurturing and receiving the gifts and contributions of persons with disabilities through formational opportunities, including theological education, consultation, forums, and publications. For nearly two decades, Ben has served with Young Life, including working with Capernaum, Young Life's work with youth with disabilities, and serving on Capernaum's mission-wide committee. His writings include Amplifying Our Witness, Giving Voice to Adolescents with Developmental Disabilities, and Disabling Mission, Enabling Witness, Exploring Missiology through the lens of disability studies, among others. He is also an occasional horse leader, sidewalker, stall mucker, and general support for his wife, Melissa, who runs Renew Therapeutic Writing Center. It's our privilege to welcome Dr. Ben Conner.
Hello, I am Ben Conner, and image description, I'm another white dude. I also wear glasses. I have some distinctive characteristics, but unless we're together, you aren't going to pick them up. I am bald, and I like to work out. So there's enough. There's enough to get who I am. Let's hop into this together. I am going to share my screen here. All right. All right. Hospitality, a Christian practice that moves the margins. The image here is of a friend of mine, Alexander. He is front and center in the picture, and there are a number of people behind him. But Alexander is holding a hula hoop that frames his face right in the middle. And so the move there is that Alexander, who's a friend of mine on the autism spectrum, is centered in the image and centered here. And I'm going to tell you more about Alexander in just a little bit, but I wanted you to meet him here. When I was teaching at Union Presbyterian Seminary, a course on child and adolescent spiritual development, I was going to teach the class about autism and how to teach people with autism. But instead, I brought Alexander and had him teach the class. And when he came in, he walked immediately to the front podium, pushed me to the side, pretended like he had a ruler tapping on the podium, and said, "Professor Alexander, at your service." And I think just the way he interacted with everybody gave them a sense that they might not at this point have the resources they need to support Alexander in his spiritual growth and development, but that Alexander was going to help them have this. And that point, just from the very beginning, how do you create a hospitable space in an academic environment where Alexander typically wouldn't be invited? And if he is invited, it certainly wouldn't be as an authority. I probably should have thought through that a little bit better ahead of time, but things worked out. What we're talking about today, and this slide is just a definition of ableism coming from Campbell's contribution to keywords for disability studies. We're looking at how ableism can get in the way of hospitality. Here is a definition. Ableism denotes the ideology of a healthy body, a normal mind, appropriate speed of thought, and acceptable expressions of emotion. So that's what it is. That we would say, is anything really wrong with that? The problem is that these things, these particular visions of the body, mind, are lifted up as normative. And anything else then is abnormal or problematic in some way. So ableism is different from disableism. Disableism would be you're prejudiced against somebody because they have a disability that somehow makes you uncomfortable about who you are. That's usually what's going on there. Ableism is lifting up a societal virtue and value so much that it filters out disabled body minds. So Campbell goes on to say, key to a system of ableism are two elements: the concept of the normative and the normal individual, and the enforcement of a divide between a perfected or developed humanity and the aberrant, unthinkable, underdeveloped, and therefore not really human. So ableism is steep steps and heavy doors and slideshows without image descriptions and speaking quickly so people can't follow and using concepts that are too difficult to follow. That's ableism is catering everything to this certain kind of body mind so that it filters out people who are different. And how does ableism impact hospitality? Well, it gets in the way of our practice of hospitality because people with disabilities are typically envisioned only as guests and not as hosts. And the reason is ableism suggests that in order to participate in the practice of hospitality as a host, one must possess particular abilities, capacities, or competencies. And what we're going to do today is push against both of these ideas. And we're going to start with understanding what in the world the practice of hospitality is. Image description is going to be challenging on this because I have 6 different images that are describing hospitality as a Christian practice. Upper left hand is my imagination's Garden of Eden. It's lush, green, there's a waterfall, verdant growth, alive, sunlight peeking through. This is the original setting of God's hospitality. God's hospitality created us. God's hospitality sustained us, gave us meaningful things to do, gave us everything we could possibly need, but also set up some parameters which we rejected. And so the top middle image is a relief of Adam and Eve being led out of the Garden of Eden, one of the angels with the flaming sword, another angel escorting them out. This image represents our rejection of God's hospitality. And when we rejected God's hospitality, then hospitality became competitive and commodified and instrumental instead of sacramental. In the first one, in the Garden of Eden, hospitality is a sacramental practice, meaning God is present. God is in the midst of it, that in our relationships, God's between our relationships. When we start to reject God's hospitality and make it our own thing, instead of receiving it as a gift, we manipulate it and control it. And so at the best, hospitality becomes a technique and not a practice. And usually it's a technique for supporting our own goals and wealth. And that would be the next slide on the upper right-hand corner. That's an image of a hotel, and you know that because it says hotel. Now, when I lived in Virginia, had you come to visit me and I didn't have room at my house, you could have gone downtown and stayed at a hotel called the Hospitality House. And the hospitality house would give you exactly as much hospitality as you paid for. And if you tipped well, they'd give you more hospitality than other people. That's an instrumental understanding of hospitality. And that is not the hospitality that developed with the early church. In the early church, their hospitality was supporting pilgrims on their journey, which was a literal faith journey to the Holy Land, which was their Bible, which was sacramental, which was a relic, because that's where Jesus had done stuff and Jesus had walked. And you're supporting pilgrims on their journey by hosting them and addressing their needs. Early Christian hospitality in the 5th century after Constantine, the pushback against the Christianization of the Roman Empire came from Julian the Apostate, a very unfortunate nickname. I'd much rather have, something like the Venerable Bede as my historically known name. Venerable sounds much better than apostate, but Julian the Apostate wanted to restore to the Roman Empire the dependence on Greek philosophies, astrologies, all these sorts of things. He wanted to get rid of religion. The problem was he was hit by a pandemic. And the way that Roman society dealt with ill people is pushing them out to the margins. And the way they dealt with the poor was pushing them out to the margins. But the Christians attended to the poor. The Christians attended to the ill, and the ill got well. And Julian called all of his priests to him. And he said, these impious Galileans, that's what he called the Christians, these impious Galileans care not only for their own sick, but for ours as well. Not only for their own poor, but for ours as well. This Christian practice of hospitality was bearing witness to something about the kingdom of God that was countercultural. That was a sacramental encounter in the practice of hospitality. But we've lost that, and it's become instrumentalized. If only someone could show us what true hospitality is about, and that's the lower left-hand image. It's a number of huts. It's an African scene. It's an African depiction of the account of Zacchaeus. And now you know from Dr. Thompson's presentation that Zacchaeus wasn't just a short man, but because of physiognomy, Zacchaeus was seen as sinister or evil in some way. On top of that, he was a person that wasn't welcomed in society because of the job he had as tax collector. He was marginalized on top of marginalized. And Amos Young has made the point that he had a disabling condition as well, being short in stature in this particular society. What happened there? Well, this is just one instance of Jesus turning hospitality on its head. It began when Jesus accepted the womb of Mary. God accepts the womb of a human. The great host who created the world that hosts us is now being hosted by us. Jesus, throughout his ministry, depended on the care and goodwill of women and other people who provided for his needs during his years of ministry. He had parents who raised him. He flipped hospitality on its head in terms of how you imagine it. And the most important issue is, what do you do with Jesus? How do you receive Jesus? And the Zacchaeus moment is an important moment in Christian hospitality before it was Christian. In this, Jesus went up to Zacchaeus and said, I'm going to your house today. What is he doing? Going to the home of a tax collector, going to a home of a sinister person, going to the home of an outcast. What's he doing? But Zacchaeus received him, brought his friends there, and here's this great reversal of hospitality. It's all throughout the New Testament narratives. Jesus going to the pool of Siloam. Jesus had to go through Samaria. Jesus meets the woman at the well. All these marginalized places where Jesus finds himself. and how is he received? So Jesus helps us to reimagine hospitality. And the next slide, the center bottom, is an image that should remind us of communion. And what's being held up is it's often the adoration of the host or the elements in communion. And this is my body. So the reminder every time we go to the communion table of who the true host is and who's welcomed. Everybody from north, south, east, and west come to the table. And every time we participate in this sacrament together, it's giving us a vision for the future banquet, bottom right-hand corner, when all of us will be gathered together around the table, once again, united with the host, with no barriers between us and ourselves, no barriers between us and the other, no barriers between us and God. If you have the opportunity to go to the Johnny and Friends Center in Burbank, California, you might see this image, which is a mural, which is a vision of this very table. Image description, you have a great banquet table with people represented from all cultures coming together. You can tell by looking at faces, there are people with different disabilities there at the table, different foods from different parts of the world represented. You see wheelchairs and crutches and all kind of things. And this is the table that we're called to be a part of. So there's your theological sort of understanding of hospitality. Hospitality as a Christian practice has a history. It starts in the garden and it ends at the banquet table and everything in between. And we're part of that history. Hospitality as a Christian practice has a social aspect. You learn it from other people. And even when you can't practice, how are you going to practice hospitality alone? It requires us crossing boundaries and making ourselves open to the gifts of other people and giving of ourselves in hospitality. God reminds us through Jesus that whoever plays the role of host and guest, we're all being hosted by God. And in a sense, we're all guests. So there's a historical aspect, there's a social aspect, there's a local aspect that hospitality looks different in each culture, but it's also universally recognized across cultures. We can see expressions of hospitality that will challenge our limited understandings of what the practice means. But perhaps most importantly, they're goods internal to the practice of hospitality that you only get to know if you get to participate in the practice. That is, there's participatory knowledge involved in the Christian practice of hospitality. And we've all experienced that. When we go out on a limb beyond where we're comfortable and receive somebody else, we receive a gift. And the gift is Jesus Christ. And the gift is communion with another person that's always mediated by the Spirit. And when we receive the hospitality of someone who's done the same thing, and we eat their food and share in their lives, then there's a participatory knowledge of how we are all united and brought together in Christ. So this next slide is just a quote from Odin's And You Welcomed Me, which is a source book on hospitality in early Christian communities. She writes, taken as a feature of Christian life, hospitality is not so much a singular act of welcome as it is a way, an orientation that attends to the otherness, listening and learning, valuing and honoring. Now, the challenge here is to do this, to attend to the otherness, to value and honor the otherness. And we have some barriers in our way. One is we see the other as a stranger. This slide is asking who is the stranger and gives a number of ways we can think about the stranger. People with disabilities are often the strange other. Typically, developing people don't know how to relate to people with intellectual disabilities often. People talk really loudly to folks in wheelchairs. They don't know what to do. Even well-meaning people just say ridiculous stuff about disability. They try to include them in communion by cramming bread into their mouths and pouring drinks into their mouths without asking if they want to participate in communion, thinking they've done a good thing. The stranger, that's people without a place. We tend to practice hospitality to strengthen existing bonds, to give ourselves some sort of benefit, right? That's the whole thing. Who do you invite to your table? The stranger is detached from basic life supporting institutions like family, work, politics, religious community, networks of relations that sustain us. This person experiences the world as the stranger. Many people who are most in need of the connection that comes with hospitality, the most in need of companionship, recognition, and care. These folks are often hidden in prisons, extended care facilities, or special ed classrooms. So one problem with our hospitality, and one way that ableism fits in, is we can't get past othering the stranger, marginalizing the stranger. This next slide has an image of water with raindrops coming, and each raindrop makes a new imprint on the water, and these expanding circles intersect with each other. Jun-Young Lee, in his work Marginality, the Key to Multicultural Theology, says marginality has no separate existence of its own, right? If something's going to be marginal, there has to be some sort of a center. We were just talking about this at a faculty meeting this morning at Western Theological Seminary. And the encouragement was to teach more contextual theologies. And my response is, all theology is contextual theology. It just depends on where you're standing at the moment. And so marginality has no separate existence of its own. What we have to do is recognize that Reformed theology is, in fact, don't tell them I said this, a contextual theology that's limited. So Jesus, yes, was marginalized in society, but everywhere Jesus went became a new center of God's activity. And so can we start to look at marginalized people in this way? And can that shape the way we think about hospitality? Next slide. I have 2 slides here, and I'm not going to go through all of them because you are going to get access to these slides later. This first slide says Jesus as the marginalized and gives 6 ways in Scripture that Jesus is marginalized. I'll cover 2 here and a couple on the next page. First, Pharisees, Sadducees, scribes, zealots. These are the Jews. They all rejected him. One of the best titles of a New Testament study I've ever seen was called A Marginal Jew. And it's about Jesus. Jesus was certainly a marginalized Jew outside the center of his own culture group. And as a Jew, he's an outsider in the larger cultural group of Greco-Roman society. So Jesus is marginalized within his own religion, marginalized within society. Even within that, he's from Nazareth, and can anything good come out of Nazareth? He has an illegitimate birth, an unwed teen mom, right? And who's the father? Next slide is more of the same here. He was born in a manger, and he was rejected by the town of Bethlehem, which is city of bread. And he's the bread of life, and he's rejected by Bethlehem. On top of that, Bethlehem's the city of David, and he's the heir of David, and he's rejected. And he's part of a group of displaced people with no land. He was born an immigrant, traveling, pushed out of his own land. So Jesus himself is marginalized. Yet every time Jesus goes somewhere, that's a center of God's activity. We tend to marginalize people as well. This next slide has 5 different concepts that we use to marginalize people. Particularly, we're going to think about it as it relates to people with disabilities. Marginalizing people is a way that we exercise control and make ourselves more comfortable. So one way we do it is we homogenize people. That is saying people with disabilities, generically, they're all the same. They are autistic people, and autistic people are like this, and we think we know everything about autistic people. Yeah, deaf people are like this. We think we know everything about deaf people, but we can't homogenize. As one famous autism self-advocate has said, if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. But homogenizing is one way. In our mind, we make ourselves comfortable with differences. Colonizing is another way. And at the end of the previous slide, I explained some of the ways we colonize, just care facilities, getting people out of sight, getting people who are different together through whatever means. And this is a way that we control. Demonizing. We see this in the news, particularly around people on the autism spectrum and mental health challenges, that someone on the autism spectrum can't feel, and so they might be more likely to participate in some horrible act of violence. When we demonize people with differences, and of course, it's also done in really awful spiritual ways, which Dr. Thompson addressed. I mean, who sinned, this person or their parents? Or literally, did a demon cause this disability? But usually it's the softer way of demonizing disability, but all of them are awful. But it's a way that we control the situation. Romanticize. There's your inspiration porn. There's your person with Down syndrome who's a little angel, and all that sort of thing. Why do we do that? Well, it's easier than actually getting to know somebody. It's easier than attending to someone, because people with intellectual disabilities make people without intellectual disabilities uncomfortable, because we think that could be us. And we wonder, though we'd never say it out loud, would I still want to be alive? It's a horrible process that people go through in romanticizing others. And then the last method we use to marginalize people is we pluralize. So whereas homogenize, we say they're all the same. With pluralize, we say, well, I mean, we all are disabled somehow, right? Aren't we all disabled? But that has the same impact of a response to Black Lives Matter saying all lives matter. Well, obviously all lives matter, but all lives aren't being treated so horribly in society and getting fewer opportunities and being mistreated and all this. Same thing with disability. Okay, we may all have, right now I've taken off my glasses and you don't want me driving you anywhere because this would now be considered a disabling condition. Now I'm wearing glasses, and guess what? There's no social stigma. Nobody cares. But there are other disabilities that are stigmatized, and there are other disabling conditions that give you fewer opportunities. Or even if you get the opportunities, you can't take advantage of them for one reason or another. And so to pluralize and say we're all disabled is a way to remove ourselves from the responsibility of advocating for those who most need support. So we marginalize people. Hospitality is a practice that helps us to move beyond our marginalization of the others. What you're seeing right now is a slide, and on the top is hospitality, and on the bottom is a seesaw type of device, and on the right-hand side, it says rejection. And on the left-hand side, it says assimilation. And these are two of the things that hospitality is addressing, true Christian hospitality. So on the right-hand side, rejection. So disableism could just reject people with disabilities, discriminate against them and say, you're not one of us, and you disconnect from them and they feel disconnected. Hospitality provides a place where you are connected. On the left-hand side, under assimilation, it says become like us. So is where rejection is, you're not one of us. Assimilation says become like us. And honestly, that's ableism. You have to learn these proper ways of being in the world, these right ways of responding that are culturally appropriate, socially appropriate. You have to learn these social skills, and then you can participate. And that's the ableist approach to hospitality. That in order to participate in the practice of hospitality, you have to develop these skill sets, these capacities. But what I'm arguing is that in the individual, there's a kind of capaciousness, a kind of presence that's needed. And if the person isn't present, then those gifts are never present. And if they don't have the chance to use those gifts, they'll never know they have something to offer. Hospitality for the church isn't about us setting up a program to include people with special needs. We have to move beyond all those concepts, but in particular, inclusion still falls into this category of assimilation sometimes. We have to say, you can come as you are, and we are going to get to know you and give you opportunities to use your gifts. And as a result, in true hospitality, we're all going to change because of this encounter. This next slide is a Henry Nouwen quote that sums up what I just said. And in his book, Reaching Out, he said, "We will never believe that we have anything to give unless there's someone who's able to receive it. Indeed, we discover our gifts in the eyes of the receiver." Back to the image of Alexander, hospitality. Alexander loves 50s music, loves 50s dances, and he wanted to host a group of people, but he didn't have the social skills or the means or the opportunities to do something like this. So it was all existing in his mind, and he was getting increasingly frustrated. So I said, why don't we host a 50s dance together? And so he got a group of his friends, contemporaries, about 20 to 25 of them. And the group that those 25 folks hosted was the Ark of Greater Williamsburg, about 100 people. And they made name tags, and they made decorations, and they welcomed people, and they sang the songs while I played guitar. And then in the end, one of Alexander's friends, Craig, who has cerebral palsy and also has an intellectual disability, also has a love of NASCAR, also loves Virginia Tech sports, also contacts me every time Virginia Tech loses a game, which is way too often. And I, even though I haven't lived in the same town with Craig for 10 years, I probably hear from him once or twice a week. Craig got up at the end of this event and said, here's what hospitality means to me. And he gave a message, lasted about 4 minutes. If you wanted to create some sort of rubric to evaluate it in terms of rhetoric, it would end up really low on your scale. If you want to talk about the impact it had, that someone who in previous years had had no friends now has a community of belonging, someone who thought he had no gifts because he didn't have a place to offer them now is welcomed and seen as someone with great contributions to make. I mean, if you want to value it that way, then I think you could see the impact that this message had. But the point of it is this, that you don't have to have particular physical abilities, intellectual capacities, social skills to participate in the practice of hospitality, because it's a communal practice and we practice it together. And those who are able to support other people so that they can participate more actively in the practice of hospitality by using their gifts in ways that will help us to reimagine what a Christian community is. we need to do this. And the reason we need to do this is so that we can experience the fullness of Christian community, which is people living together in love, sharing their gifts for the sake of participating in God's ongoing redemptive work in the world. And you simply can't be disabled from that, even if you are impaired. If you want to learn more about this with me and with Carlos Thompson, Dr. Carlos Thompson, we have a Center for Disability and Ministry at Western Seminary, and we have a number of programs. I've just gone to a slide that has our Center for Disability and Ministry logo and has some of our friends just having a wonderful time together, an image of the kinds of conversations that happen around these issues at Western Theological Seminary. We have a whole curriculum, a graduate certificate in disability and ministry, a master's of arts, even a doctor of ministry cohort, which we're going to start our second one, not this January, but next January. So thank you for attending to this.
I saw Ellie had raised her hand for a second. Ellie, can I just ask, did you have a question still?
I have a bit of an interesting story to tell. I have mobility issues, and when I do my groceries, I go to a store where they have a scooter so that I can be seated throughout browsing the store and stuff. And one day, there was some toilet paper on sale, and it was on the very top shelf, of course. And so I waited until somebody came along. It was a couple, and I said, "Excuse me, can you help me? Can you reach the toilet paper that's up there?" Yeah, sure. It was a man and a woman, and the woman came over. The man sort of stayed a distance away, and she got my toilet paper down, and I thanked her, and then she asked me. She says, "Do you have to ask for help all the time?" I said, "Well, sometimes I do." When things are on the very top shelf or on the very bottom shelf, I have difficulty accessing them. And so I have to ask for help. And she said, "Well, does it bother you to ask for help?" I said, "No." I said, "I'm determined to stay as independent as long as possible. And, with a little help from other people, I can do that. And I continue to do that." And she was quite surprised about that. She says, "I always have a lot of difficulty asking for help." And so, yeah, that was a bit, it was an opportunity to educate her that, if you're having difficulty, ask for help. My experience is that people are always glad to help. And so, as we had gone through a different line to a checkout line, but we met heading out the door again, and she stopped me and she said, "Thank you so much for asking me to help." And she says, that made me think a lot about me. And she said, I had more bags of groceries than I could handle, and so I got my partner to help carry them. And I said, "Oh, great."
Yeah.
So, this is someone that's going to, look at people with disabilities in a different light in the future, and someone who now feels comfortable asking for help herself. So, yeah.
Well, what a great expression of mutual hospitality, Ellie, because she asked if she could be of help to you, a form of hospitality.
No, she didn't. I asked her.
You asked her. Okay, wonderful.
I asked her.
So you invited her into your experience, which is such a great way to engage others. So thank you for that story. We really appreciate that.
And like talking to other people, Like that incident really helped me to when I see other people that I think might need help, I ask them, do you need help? Or is there a way I can help? Rather than assume, because that's what ableism is. Right? You assume what they need and that I know best what you need. And no, it's not like that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ellie. Casey, I see the raised hand. You can feel free to click off the raised hand and ask a question, please.
My question is, we really have a challenge with, building hospitality in our churches. As the restructuring team for the RCA was reforming and putting ideas out there, most of their stuff has been inaccessible as far as meetings is concerned, with QR codes. And we need to be equally included in what I believe in the mission work and discipleship. So if the leaders in the Senate and other parts of the denominations don't support what we're trying to do, how do we overcome that barrier?
That sounds like a larger. That sounds like a Jeremy Simpson question there.
Well, but what techniques do we use to encourage hospitality that's the question.
I think that's a great question. Any suggestions for that, Dr. Conner?
Yeah. So come again with the question. One more time with the question. I had a hard time hearing it.
As the Reformed Church restructures, a lot of their stuff is indirect, so you don't know exactly what their proposals are. When they had meetings, they put the stuff in QR codes, and you were supposed to respond to them, but I could not on my Braille device. When I wrote an email about this, I got some kind of a generic technical answer, I think. But my question is, if the people above who are leading the churches and the denominations and how they set up the mechanisms, and we're not included equally as part of that as mission work and discipleship, and what mechanisms do we use to try to encourage that or be a part of that hospitality?
Right. No, so the first thing is the instinct that nothing about us without us, and that if you're going to talk about some sort of a way of reforming things, you can't talk about how it will work for people with disabilities without people with those disabilities present. That's the initial instinct. Now, your question is, how do you make sure you do have that representation? And I have a long-term approach to that hopefully will work, but more immediately, that's what the RCA, CRC disability concerns used to do, right? Those very sorts of things. And so I honestly don't know the state of that at this particular time, which is why I was deferring to someone else. Then my long-term vision for how to do that, which doesn't help in the immediate, is the sorts of programs we're doing at Western. Make sure everybody who comes through as a pastor is going to have some experience around disability and be able to think about it and be an advocate, because they've experienced the gifts of people with disabilities through the courses, and they've thought more deeply about this. But just in terms of making sure at an administrative level that people are attentive to these things, I think just speaking it out loud right here in this group should have some impact, and there'll need to be follow-up. But it shouldn't have to be by you.
Right. Yes. I hope, one of the ways that this happens is by all of us, learning from what you're sharing with us, Dr. Conner. We take that out from here, and we impact our communities with an understanding of what it looks like to be hospitable. and to not marginalize people, and just continue to project our ableism, our inherent ableism, onto every situation. I see we have another question from Patricia Johnson. Would you go ahead and ask a question, Patricia, if you're able?
Yeah, hi. It's not so much a question. I think it's more an answer or comment to the last gentleman's question and concern, because, I've just been in conversation with different people, different ministers, and specifically one of the ministers whose congregation is predominantly a congregation of people with disabilities, and I believe she was one of the creators of this forum. And I think that that's what this forum is about also, in, if anything, trying to regenerate, I'm going to say, because I do understand there was a, disability, I don't know what you say, council or something involved with the RCA, as Mr. Conner alluded to. So I think that we're trying to regenerate this. I think it's trying to be reinvigorated, because this is a societal concern. It's societal, it's church concern, definitely, and that's what we're here for. So I'm just very happy to see this turnout, and hope that, as you say, the powers that be see the turnout and hear the need. So I just wanted to make that comment, that I think that that's what this forum is for, hopefully, to reinvigorate that.
Thank you very much, Patricia. I did have one question in the chat, which was to share the image source for the banquet table art piece. Dr. Conner, can you confirm, is that the art piece that's hanging in the Johnny and Friends headquarters?
Yeah, it is. It's a mural painted on the wall in the foyer at Johnny and Friends International Ministry Center in Burbank, California.
All right, I am posting a link in the chat which takes you directly to that art piece, which apparently was created by Hyatt Moore.